Welcome to these stories for the new year. The calendar has turned, a fresh chapter opens, and yet the wisdom that guides us forward is ancient, patient, and kind. Tonight we gather 6 teachings from the Buddhist path, not as lessons to be learned, but as stories to be felt. Each tale carries a truth that the monks and teachers have passed down through centuries. Truths about how to live with an open heart, a clear mind, and gentle hands. You need do nothing but rest. Let your body settle into stillness. Let your breath find its natural rhythm. There is no effort required here, no striving, no goal to reach. These stories will unfold slowly, one after another, each carrying a small seed of wisdom. They ask nothing of you except that you listen and allow yourself to be held by their quiet rhythm. Let them carry you towards sleep the way a river carries a leaf gently, inevitably, without resistance. The new year stretches ahead of you. It is unmarked and open, and these teachings, woven into story, are companions for the journey. The first story begins with a truth the Buddha taught long ago, that all things change. Nothing remains the same. Not the seasons, not our circumstances, not even this moment, which is already becoming the next. This is the teaching of impermanence, and it begins now, in a monastery where winter gives way to something new. A monk named Kenshin lived in a mountain monastery where the winters were long and silent. The monastery sat high on a ridge, surrounded by peaks that held snow for half the year. The buildings were made of dark wood and gray stone, simple and strong, built to endure the cold and the wind. Kenshin had been at the monastery for 15 years. He had arrived as a young man, uncertain and searching, and he had stayed. He had learned to sit in meditation for hours without moving. He had learned to wake before dawn and chant the morning sutras. He had learned to find peace in routine, in the predictable rhythm of monastic life. But on the first morning of the new year, Kenshin woke with a feeling he could not name, a restlessness, an unease. He rose in the darkness of his small room, dressed in his robes, and stepped outside into the cold. The air was sharp and still. The stars were bright overhead, countless and distant. The monastery grounds were silent, everyone else still sleeping. Kenshin walked across the courtyard to the meditation hall. His feet made soft sounds on the stone path. His breath misted in the air. He climbed the wooden steps and entered the hall, sliding the door closed behind him. The hall was dark and empty. Rows of meditation cushions sat in neat lines. The altar at the far end held a single candle, its flame steady and small. The smell of old incense hung in the air, faint and familiar. Kenshin walked to his usual place, the third cushion from the left in the second row, and he knelt down. He arranged his robes, settled into position, and closed his eyes. He began to breathe. Long, slow breaths, in and out, letting his mind settle, letting his body relax into stillness. But the restlessness remained. It was not loud, it was not frantic. It was simply there, a small current of discomfort running beneath the surface of his awareness. He sat with it, watching it, trying to let it pass as he had been taught. All feelings pass. All sensations arise and dissolve. This was the teaching, this was the practice, but the feeling did not pass. Kenshin sat in the dark hall for a long time, the candle flickering on the altar, and he realized something he had not allowed himself to see before. He was bored, not with meditation itself, not with the teachings, but with the sameness, with the predictability, with the way each day unfolded exactly like the day before, wake at the same time, chant the same sutras, eat the same meals, sit in the same hall, walk the same paths. For 15 years, it had been enough. It had been exactly what he needed. But now, on this first morning of the new year, he felt something pulling at him, a desire for change, a longing for something different, something new, and he felt guilty for wanting it. Kenshin opened his eyes and looked at the altar. The candle burned steadily. The Buddha statue sat in stillness, serene and unchanging, and he thought, I should not want change. I should be content. I should have transcended this, but he had not. The hall remained silent. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the stars fading into the gray of pre-dawn. Kenshin sat on his cushion, his hands folded in his lap, and he felt a heaviness settle over him. He did not know what to do. After some time, he heard the sound of footsteps on the wooden steps outside. The door slid open, and the abbot entered. The abbot was an old man, thin and upright, with a face lined by decades of practice and teaching. He moved slowly but with clarity, crossing the hall to the altar, where he lit a stick of incense and placed it in the holder. The smoke rose in a thin line, curling upward toward the ceiling. The abbot turned and saw Kenshin sitting alone in the dim hall. He paused, then walked over and knelt beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together in the growing light, the smell of incense filling the air. Finally, the abbot said, "You are troubled." It was not a question. Kenshin nodded. "I do not know what is wrong with me, teacher." The abbot was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Tell me." Kenshin hesitated, and then the words came. "I have been here for 15 years. I have followed the practice. I have done everything I was taught. But this morning I woke and felt restless, as if something is missing, as if I want something to change, and I feel ashamed of that. I should be beyond wanting. I should be content." The abbot listened, his gaze resting on the altar, and when Kenshin finished, he nodded slowly. "You believe that wanting change means you have failed," the abbot said. "Yes, but change is not failure," the abbot said. "Change is the nature of all things." Kenshin looked at him, confused. The abbot gestured toward the window, where the pale light of dawn was growing stronger. "Look outside. What season is it?" "Winter," Kenshin said. "And what will it become?" "Spring." "Does the winter resist becoming spring?" Kenshin was silent. "Does the tree resist losing its leaves in autumn? Does the river resist flowing from the mountain to the sea?" The abbot's voice was gentle. "All things change, Kenshin. This is not a flaw. It is the way of the world. To be alive is to change, but the teachings say to be content," Kenshin said, "to let go of desire. The teachings say to let go of clinging," the abbot corrected. "There is a difference. You can desire without clinging. You can want change without grasping at it desperately. You can notice that something in you is ready to move, and you can honor that without shame." Kenshin sat with this, turning it over in his mind. 15 years ago, you came here because something in you needed stillness," the abbot said. "And stillness served you. It shaped you. But perhaps now, something in you needs movement. And that is not wrong. That is simply what is true." The abbot stood slowly, his knees creaking slightly. He looked down at Kenshin with kindness. "The monastery will always be here," he said, "and you will always carry what you have learned here. But do not mistake permanence for virtue. Even the Buddha left his home. Even the seasons turn." He placed a hand on Kenshin's shoulder, briefly, and then he walked to the altar, bowed, and left the hall. Kenshin sat alone in the silence. The light through the window was growing brighter now, pale gold touching the wooden floor. He could hear sounds from outside the other monks waking, the soft clang of the breakfast bell, the rustle of robes and footsteps. He sat very still, feeling something shift inside him. Not a decision, exactly, but a loosening, a release of the guilt he had been carrying. Change was not failure. It was not betrayal. It was simply the way of things. He thought of the river that ran below the monastery, how it flowed always downward, always forward, shaped by the land but never stopping. He thought of the seasons turning, each one necessary, each one beautiful in its time. And he thought, I have been winter long enough. Kenshin stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting. He walked to the altar and bowed deeply, his forehead almost touching the floor. He bowed to the Buddha, to the teachings, to the 15 years he had spent in this place. And then he straightened, turned, and walked out of the hall. Outside, the morning was cold and bright. The other monks were moving through the courtyard toward the dining hall. Kenshin stood on the steps, looking out at the mountains, at the vast white peaks and the pale sky. He did not know what would come next. He did not know where he would go, or when, or how. But he knew that something was changing. And for the first time in months, he felt not fear, but a quiet excitement. The new year had begun, and like the seasons, he would move with it. And somewhere not far from that monastery, another story is beginning to unfold. In a village at the base of the mountain, a young woman named Hana stood in her small workshop, looking at a loom that had been silent for weeks. Hana was a weaver. She had learned the craft from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before that. The loom was old, made of dark wood worn smooth by generations of hands. It stood against the wall of the workshop, large and patient, waiting, but Hana had not touched it. She had been standing in front of it every morning for the past month, intending to work, intending to begin a new piece. But each time she reached for the shuttle, something stopped her, a hesitation, a doubt. She did not know what to weave. In the past, it had been easy. Customers came with requests, a blanket for a wedding, a tapestry for a temple, a length of cloth for a robe. She would listen to what they wanted, picture it in her mind, and begin. The work had flowed naturally, her hands moving with practiced ease, the threads coming together into patterns that pleased both her and those who commissioned them. But recently, the commissions had slowed. The village was small, and there were only so many blankets and tapestries needed. And for the first time in years, Hana found herself with time to weave whatever she wanted, time to create without obligation. And she did not know what to create. On the first morning of the new year, Hana stood in her workshop, her hands resting on the wooden frame of the loom, and she felt a frustration rising in her chest. She thought, I should be grateful. I have time. I have materials. I have skill. But all she felt was blocked. She turned away from the loom and walked to the window. Outside, the village was waking. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few people moved along the narrow lanes between houses. The sky was pale and clear, washed clean by the cold. Hana stood at the window, her arms crossed, and she thought of the new year stretching ahead of her. Everyone spoke of new beginnings, fresh starts, setting intentions. But what intention could she set when she did not even know what she wanted to make? There was a knock at the door. Hana turned. surprised. She walked to the door and opened it to find an old monk standing on her step. He was thin and bent, his robe patched in several places, his face deeply lined. She recognized him vaguely. He lived at the monastery up the mountain, though she had only seen him a handful of times over the years when he came down to the village for supplies. "Good morning," the monk said, his voice soft and kind. "I am sorry to disturb you. I am looking for someone who might be able to repair something for me." Hana nodded. "What is it?" The monk reached into his robe and pulled out a small cloth bag. He opened it and took out a prayer flag, a rectangle of faded cotton, printed with symbols and mantras in black ink. The fabric was torn in several places, and the edges were frayed. "It is very old," the monk said. "It has hung outside the meditation hall for many years. The wind finally tore it beyond what I can mend. I thought perhaps a weaver might know how to repair it, or if not, to make a new one." Hana took the flag carefully, turning it over in her hands. The fabric was soft and thin, worn almost translucent in places. She could see where the wind had pulled at it, where the threads had given way. The symbols were still visible, though faded mantras for compassion, for peace, for the benefit of all beings. "I can make you a new one," Hana said. "This one is too damaged to repair properly." The monk nodded. "That is kind. But there is no hurry. Make it when you are ready." Hana looked at him, puzzled. "You do not need it soon?" "The flag serves a purpose," the monk said. "But the purpose is not urgent. It is simply an offering, a way of sending good intentions into the world. Whether it is made today or next month, the intention is the same." Hana held the old flag, feeling its lightness, its fragility. She thought of how many seasons it had hung in the wind, how many storms it had weathered, how many prayers it had carried. "What matters," the monk said gently, "is not when you make it, but why. If you make it with a good heart, with the intention of offering something beautiful to the world, then it will serve its purpose. The timing is secondary." He smiled at her, a soft smile that reached his eyes, and then he bowed slightly. "Thank you for your help. I will return in a few weeks to see how you are doing." And then he turned and walked away, his steps slow and deliberate, his robe swaying slightly as he moved down the lane. Hana stood in the doorway, holding the old prayer flag, and she felt something shift inside her. She had been so focused on what to make, on finding the perfect project, the perfect idea, that she had forgotten why she made things in the first place. Not for perfection, not for approval, but as an offering, as a way of giving something to the world. She looked down at the flag in her hands. It was simple, just cloth and ink. But it had been made with intention, with care, and it had served its purpose for many years. She could do the same. Hana walked back into her workshop and stood in front of the loom. She looked at it with new eyes. It was not waiting for her to have the perfect idea. It was simply waiting for her to begin. She thought, "I will make the prayer flag, and I will make it with the intention of offering peace." That was enough. She did not need a grand vision. She did not need to know exactly how it would look, or whether it would be perfect, or whether anyone would praise it. She simply needed to begin with a good intention and let the work unfold from there. Hana reached for the shuttle. She selected thread white cotton for the base, black for the symbols. She began to set up the loom, her hands moving with the familiar motions she had practiced for years. Thread by thread, she prepared the warp, stretching it across the frame, securing it at each end. As she worked, she felt the frustration dissolve. Her mind quieted, Her breath steadied. She was not thinking about the outcome. She was simply present with the work, with the texture of the thread in her hands, with the rhythm of the loom. This was right intention, not a perfect plan, not a flawless vision, just a sincere desire to offer something good to the world and the willingness to begin. Hannah worked through the morning, her hands moving steadily, the fabric beginning to take shape on the loom. She did not rush, she did not worry. She simply wove one thread at a time, with care and with kindness. And as the sun rose higher, filling the workshop with warm light, she thought, "This is how I begin the new year. Not with certainty, not with perfection, but with intention, with presence, with the simple act of offering what I can and trusting that it is enough." And in a neighboring village, at the same hour, another story takes shape. A farmer named Takeshi stood at the edge of his field, looking at rows of soil that had been prepared for planting. The field was small, just enough to grow vegetables for his family and a little extra to sell at the market. He had worked this land for 20 years, following the same rhythms his father had taught him. But this year, something felt different. Takeshi had spent the winter planning. He had read about new methods of farming, ways to increase yield, ways to grow crops more efficiently. He had drawn diagrams. He had calculated expenses. He had imagined the field transformed rows of thriving plants, baskets overflowing with vegetables, enough surplus to finally save money, to improve the house, to give his children a better life. He had set goals, clear, specific goals, and he had been excited about them. But now, standing at the edge of the field on the first morning of the new year, Takeshi felt a weight pressing on his chest. What if the weather did not cooperate? What if the new methods failed? What if he invested time and money into these plans and nothing came of it? The sky was pale and cold. A light frost covered the ground, making the soil glitter faintly in the early light. Takeshi looked at the field, at the neat rows waiting to be planted, and he felt paralyzed. He wanted so badly for this year to be different, for the harvest to be abundant, for his efforts to pay off. But the wanting itself felt like a trap. The more he hoped, the more he feared disappointment. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see his neighbor, an old man named Jun, walking slowly along the path that bordered the fields. Jun was very old, his back bent, his face creased with age. He had farmed the land next to Takeshi's for as long as anyone could remember, and though he moved slowly now, he still tended a small garden behind his house. "Good morning, Takeshi," Jun said, stopping beside him. "Good morning," Takeshi replied. Jun looked out at the field, squinting slightly in the pale light. "You are starting early this year. You are starting early this year. You are starting early this year. You are starting early this year. I want to try some new things," Takeshi said. "New methods. I have been planning all winter." Jun nodded slowly. "That is good. Planning is good." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Jun said, "But do not hold your plans too tightly." Takeshi looked at him. "What do you mean?" Jun gestured toward the field. "You can prepare the soil, you can plant the seeds, you can water and weed and tend, but you cannot make the rain come. You cannot control the sun. You cannot force the seeds to grow at the pace you want." Takeshi felt a flicker of frustration. "I know that, but I can try. I can do my best." "Of course," Jun said, "you should do your best. But then you must let go. You must plant with care and then release your attachment to the outcome. But if I do not care about the outcome, why would I try at all? Takeshi asked. June smiled, a gentle smile. Caring and clinging are not the same thing. You can care deeply about your work. You can tend the field with love and attention. But if you cling to a specific result, if you tell yourself that you will only be happy if the harvest is exactly what you imagined, then you will suffer, because the harvest will be what it will be, and you cannot control that. Takeshi looked at the field, at the rows of soil waiting for seeds. He thought of all the plans he had made, all the hopes he had built up, and he felt the weight of them pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. What should I do then? He asked quietly. Jun was silent for a long moment, and then he said, Plant the seeds, tend the field. Do the work with a full heart, but do not grasp at the harvest. Trust that whatever grows will be enough. And if it is not what you expected, then you will adapt. You will learn. You will try again. He placed a hand on Takeshi's shoulder, briefly, and then he continued on his slow walk along the path, his footsteps soft on the frost-covered ground. Takeshi stood alone at the edge of the field, the cold air sharp in his lungs, and he felt something loosen inside him. He thought of a teaching he had heard once, from a monk who had passed through the village. The monk had spoken about the middle way, about the balance between effort and surrender. He had said, work as if everything depends on you, pray as if everything depends on the gods, and then release your grip and trust the process. Takeshi had not understood it at the time, but now, standing here, he began to see. He could work hard, he could plan carefully, he could give his best effort to the field, but he could not control the outcome. And if he tried to, if he clung desperately to his vision of success, he would only create suffering for himself. The teaching was called non-attachment, not indifference, not apathy, but a willingness to engage fully with life, to care deeply, and yet to hold the results lightly, with open hands. Takeshi took a breath, slow and deep, and he felt the weight on his chest begin to ease. He would plant the seeds, he would tend the field, he would do everything in his power to create a good harvest, but he would not demand that the harvest be exactly what he imagined. He would not tie his happiness to an outcome he could not control. He would work with care, and then he would let go. Takeshi walked forward onto the field, the frost crunching softly under his boots. He knelt down and picked up a handful of soil, feeling its cold weight in his palm. It was good soil, rich and dark. Ready, he thought, I will do my best, and I will trust that it is enough. He stood, brushed the soil from his hands, and walked to the small shed where he kept his tools and seeds. He would begin today, not with fear, not with desperate hope, but with steady effort and an open heart. The new year stretched ahead, unmarked and uncertain. And Takeshi, like the field, was ready to meet it. The fourth story begins in a small room where a woman sits alone, trying to quiet her mind. Her name was Emiko, and she had come to the monastery 3 days ago seeking guidance. She was not a nun, she was not a monk. She was simply someone who had heard that the monastery offered meditation retreats for lay people, and she had decided, on impulse, to come. She did not know exactly why. Her life in the city had been fine, not terrible, not wonderful, just fine. She had a job that paid enough, a small apartment, a few friends she saw occasionally, but somewhere beneath the surface of her days, there had been a persistent feeling of dissatisfaction. a sense that she was moving through life without really living it, that she was always thinking about the next thing, the next task, the next worry, and never quite present in the moment she was in. So she had come here, to this quiet monastery on the mountain, hoping that silence and stillness might offer something she could not name. But on the first morning of the new year, sitting alone in the meditation room assigned to her, Emiko found that stillness was harder than she had imagined. The room was simple, a single cushion on a wooden floor, a window that looked out at pine trees and sky. Nothing else. She had been instructed to sit here for an hour each morning, following her breath, observing her thoughts without attachment. She had been sitting for perhaps 10 minutes, and her mind was chaos. Thoughts came in rapid succession, one after another, relentless. She thought about work emails she had not answered, projects that were waiting. She thought about her apartment. Had she locked the door? Had she left anything on the stove? She thought about her mother, who she had not called in weeks. She thought about a conversation with a friend that had gone badly. She thought about what she would eat for lunch. The thoughts were loud and insistent, and beneath them all was a restless discomfort, an urge to get up, to move, to do something. Emiko opened her eyes and looked at the window. The pine trees stood dark against the pale morning sky. A crow landed on a branch, sat for a moment, then flew away. The world outside was peaceful, still, unbothered. But inside her, there was no peace. She closed her eyes again and tried to focus on her breath. In, out, in, out. But within seconds, her mind had drifted back to the emails, to the apartment, to the endless list of things she needed to remember and worry about. She felt a surge of frustration. This was supposed to help. This was supposed to bring calm. But all it was doing was showing her how utterly incapable she was of being still. There was a soft knock on the door frame. Emiko opened her eyes and turned to see a nun standing in the doorway. The nun was middle-aged, her head shaved, her expression gentle and calm. She wore simple gray robes and held a small wooden tray with a cup of tea. "I thought you might like some tea," the nun said quietly. Emiko nodded, grateful for the interruption. The nun entered and set the tray on the floor beside the cushion, then knelt down across from Emiko. "How is your practice going?" the nun asked. Emiko hesitated, then said, "Not well. My mind will not be quiet." The nun nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "That is normal." "Is it?" Emiko said. "I thought meditation was supposed to make your mind calm." The nun smiled gently. "Meditation does not make your mind calm. It shows you what your mind is actually doing. Most of the time, our minds are very busy. We just do not notice because we are busy too. But when you sit still, you see it clearly." Emiko looked down at her hands. "So I am doing it wrong." "No," the nun said. "You are doing it exactly right. You are seeing what is there. That is the first step." She reached for the teacup and handed it to Emiko. "Drink this. Let it cool a moment first." Emiko took the cup, holding it in both hands. The warmth of the ceramic spread into her palms. She could smell the tea, something herbal, faintly sweet. She looked down at the surface of the liquid, pale green, slightly steaming. The nun said, "What do you feel right now?" Emiko thought for a moment. "I feel the warmth of the cup. I smell the tea." "Good," the nun said. "You are here, right now, in this moment." Emiko looked at her, not understanding. "This is mindfulness," the nun said. "Not having a perfectly quiet mind, but being present with what is actually happening. Right now you are holding tea. You are feeling warmth. You are smelling herbs. This is all that exists in this moment. The emails do not exist here. The apartment does not exist here. Only this, only now. Emiko looked down at the cup again. She noticed the way the light from the window touched the surface of the tea. She noticed the slight tremor in her hands. She noticed the sensation of her breath, slow and steady, moving in and out. But my mind keeps going to other things, Emiko said. Yes, the nun said. It will. That is what minds do. They wander, they think, they plan, they worry. This is not a problem. The practice is not to stop the thoughts. The practice is to notice when you have wandered and gently bring yourself back to the breath, back to the body, back to this moment. The nun paused, then said, "Do you know the story of the Buddha and the wild elephant?" Emiko shook her head. The Buddha was once asked how to train the mind, and he said it is like training a wild elephant. At first, the elephant is unruly. It runs wherever it wants. It does not listen. But you do not beat the elephant. You do not punish it. You simply, patiently, again and again, guide it back to the post. And over time, with kindness and patience, the elephant learns. It becomes calm. It becomes steady. The nun looked at Emiko with warmth. Your mind is the elephant. It will run. It will wander. But each time you notice and bring it back, you are training it, not with force, not with frustration, but with gentleness, with loving kindness toward yourself. Emiko sat with this, holding the warm cup, feeling the weight of the nun's words settle into her. Loving kindness, the nun said, begins with yourself. Most of us are very harsh with ourselves. We expect perfection. We criticize every mistake. But the Buddha taught that we must first learn to be kind to ourselves, to meet our own struggles with compassion, to say, yes, this is hard. Yes, I am struggling, and that is okay. Emiko felt something tighten in her throat. She had not realized how much she had been judging herself, how much she had been expecting to sit down and immediately be calm, immediately be good at this, immediately succeed. And when she had not, she had decided she was failing. You are not failing, the nun said, as if reading her thoughts. You are learning, and learning takes time. It takes patience. It takes kindness. The nun stood slowly, her knees making a soft sound on the wooden floor. She looked at Emiko with a gentle smile. Drink your tea, she said, and when you are ready, return to your breath. And when your mind wanders, which it will simply notice, and bring it back with kindness, as many times as it takes. She bowed slightly, and then she left the room, her footsteps soft on the wooden walkway outside. Emiko sat alone, holding the cup of tea. She lifted it to her lips and took a slow sip. The tea was warm and slightly bitter and soothing. She could feel it move down her throat, into her body. She could feel the warmth spreading through her chest. She set the cup down carefully and returned to the cushion. She closed her eyes. She took a breath. In, out. Her mind immediately went to work and email, a worry, a plan, she noticed, and she brought herself back, gently, without judgment. In, out. The mind wandered again. She noticed. She brought herself back. In, out. Over and over, patiently, with as much kindness as she could muster, she returned to the breath, and slowly, gradually, she felt something shift. Not that the thoughts stopped, but that she was less caught by them. She was watching them pass, like clouds across a sky, without needing to grab hold of each one. This was mindfulness, not perfection, not a quiet mind, but the practice of returning, the practice of being here, now, in this moment, with kindness. Emiko sat in the small room, the morning light growing brighter through the window, and she felt something unfamiliar, a softness, a spaciousness, a sense that perhaps she did not need to be anywhere other than where she was. The new year stretched ahead, and she would meet it not by demanding perfection from herself, but by learning, slowly and patiently, to be present, to be kind, to be here. And in the valley below, another story finds its voice. There was a teacher named Hiroshi who worked in a small school at the edge of a village. He taught children from the surrounding farms and families reading, writing, basic arithmetic, and when he could, the old stories and poems that his own teacher had shared with him. Hiroshi loved his work, he loved the children, he loved the way their faces lit up when they understood something new. He loved the quiet rhythm of the school day, the sound of their voices reciting lessons, the scratch of brushes on paper. But on the first morning of the new year, Hiroshi sat at his desk in the empty schoolroom, looking at a letter he had received the day before. The letter was from the regional education office. It informed him that the school would be receiving a new curriculum, one that was standardized across all the villages in the region. The letter outlined a strict schedule, specific lessons to be taught at specific times, assessments to be given at regular intervals, goals and benchmarks and standards that every child must meet. Hiroshi had read the letter 3 times, and each time he felt a growing unease. He understood the intention. The officials wanted to ensure that every child received a good education, no matter where they lived. They wanted consistency. They wanted quality, and Hiroshi could not argue with that. But he also knew his students. He knew that some of them learned quickly, and some needed more time. He knew that some loved stories and would sit for hours listening to poetry, while others were restless and learned best through movement and play. He knew that the rhythm of the seasons affected them. In spring, they were distracted by the fields awakening. In winter, they were drowsy and needed warmth and patience. He had always taught with flexibility, adjusting to what each child needed, moving at the pace that felt right. But this new curriculum would not allow for that. It was rigid, fixed, one size for all. Hiroshi sat at his desk, the letter in his hands, and he felt torn. He wanted to do right by his students, but he also wanted to follow the guidelines he had been given. He wanted to honor the individuality of each child, but he also wanted to meet the standards expected of him. He did not know how to do both. There was a sound at the door, and Hiroshi looked up to see an old man standing in the doorway. The man was very old, his back bent, his face lined deeply with age. Hiroshi recognized him. He was a retired teacher who lived in the village, someone who had taught in this very schoolroom decades ago. "Good morning, Hiroshi," the old man said. "Good morning, Master Sato," Hiroshi replied, standing and bowing. The old man waved a hand. "Please, sit. I was walking past and saw you here. You look troubled." Hiroshi hesitated, then gestured to the letter on the desk. "I have been given a new curriculum. It is very strict, very structured, and I do not know how to follow it without losing what I believe is important." Master Sato walked slowly into the room and sat down on one of the small benches the children used. He looked around the room at the brushes and paper, at the books on the shelves, at the sunlight falling through the window. "Tell me," he said, "what do you believe is important?" Hiroshi thought for a moment. "I believe that each child is different. that they learn in different ways, at different paces. I believe that education is not just about filling their minds with facts, but about helping them become kind, thoughtful, curious people. Master Sato nodded. And what does the curriculum ask of you? It asks that I teach specific lessons at specific times, that I measure their progress with tests, that I ensure they all meet the same standards. And you see these as opposites, Master Sato said. Are they not? Hiroshi asked. Master Sato was quiet for a long moment, looking at the sunlight on the floor. Then he said, "Have you heard of the middle way?" Hiroshi nodded. The Buddha's teaching, to avoid extremes. Yes, Master Sato said. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from extremes. Too much indulgence leads to one kind of suffering. Too much austerity leads to another. The path to peace is found in balance. In the middle, he looked at Hiroshi. You are caught between two extremes. On one side, complete freedom, no structure, no standards, no guidance. On the other side, complete rigidity, no flexibility, no adaptation, no room for the individual. But you do not have to choose one or the other. You can walk the middle path. Hiroshi leaned forward. How? You follow the curriculum, Master Sato said. You teach the lessons, you give the assessments, but within that structure, you find room for flexibility. You meet the standards, but you also meet the children where they are. You work diligently toward the goals, but you do not sacrifice kindness for achievement. He smiled gently. Structure is not the enemy of compassion, and compassion is not the enemy of discipline. They can coexist. They must coexist. The middle path is not about choosing between things. It is about holding both at once, with balance. Hiroshi sat back, turning this over in his mind. He thought of the tightrope walker he had once seen at a festival, balancing on a thin rope stretched between two poles. The walker did not lean too far to one side or the other. He held himself in the center, adjusting constantly, finding equilibrium. I can follow the curriculum, Hiroshi said slowly, but I can also pause when a child needs more time. I can teach the required lessons, but I can also tell stories that help them understand. I can give the assessments, but I can also encourage them with kindness when they struggle. Yes, Master Sato said, you can do both. It will take effort, it will take thought, but it is possible. He stood slowly, his knees creaking. The middle path is not the easy path. It requires constant attention, constant adjustment, but it is the path that leads to peace, for you and for your students. Master Sato walked to the door, paused, and looked back at Hiroshi. Do not let perfection become your enemy. You will not always find perfect balance, but each day you can try, and that is enough. He bowed and left. Hiroshi sat at his desk, looking at the letter, and he felt the tension in his chest ease. He did not have to choose between two extremes. He could walk the middle path. He could honor both the structure he had been given and the individual needs of his students. It would take effort, it would take creativity, but it was possible. The new year stretched ahead, and with it, a new curriculum. But Hiroshi would meet it not with rigidity, and not with resistance, but with balance. With the wisdom of the middle way, he picked up a brush, dipped it in ink, and began to write notes in the margins of the curriculum document. Small adjustments, small kindnesses, small ways to honor both the structure and the children. And as he wrote, he felt a quiet confidence growing. And in the monastery, where the first story began, the final story now completes the circle. It was evening now, the first evening of the new year. The sun had set behind the mountains, and the sky was a deep indigo, scattered with the first stars. The monastery was quiet. The monks had finished their evening meal and were gathering in the meditation hall for the final sitting of the day. Among them was a young monk named Daiki. He was only 19, the youngest monk in the monastery. He had arrived less than a year ago, fleeing a life in the city that had felt empty and hollow. He had come seeking meaning, seeking peace, seeking some sense that his life mattered, and he had found discipline. He had found routine. He had found a structure that held him, but he had not yet found peace. Daiki knelt on his cushion in the meditation hall, surrounded by the other monks, and he tried to still his mind, but his thoughts churned with doubt. He thought, I have been here almost a year. I have followed all the teachings. I have meditated every day. I have chanted the sutras. I have worked in silence, and yet I still feel lost. He felt like he was failing, like everyone else had found something he could not reach, like there was some secret, some key that everyone else possessed and he did not. The abbot entered the hall, moving slowly to his place at the front. He lit a stick of incense, placed it in the holder, and then sat down. The monks followed, settling into stillness. But Daiki could not settle. His mind raced. His chest felt tight, and beneath it all was a deep, aching question. What if I never find peace? What if I am not capable of this? The sitting ended. The monks rose, bowed, and began to file out of the hall. Daiki stood, intending to leave, but the abbot's voice stopped him. Daiki, stay a moment. Daiki turned, surprised. The other monks left, and soon it was only him and the abbot in the dim hall. The candle on the altar flickered. The smell of incense hung in the air. The abbot looked at him with kind eyes. You are struggling. It was not a question. Daiki nodded, his throat tight. Yes, teacher. Sit, the abbot said gently. Daiki returned to his cushion. The abbot remained where he was, sitting in stillness, and for a long time he said nothing. Daiki waited, his hands folded in his lap, his heart beating too fast. Finally, the abbot spoke. When I was young, like you, I believed that enlightenment was a destination, a place I would reach if I practiced hard enough, if I sat long enough, if I did everything correctly. And I pushed myself. I sat for hours until my legs screamed. I fasted until I was weak. I drove myself without mercy, believing that effort alone would bring me to the truth. The abbot paused, his gaze distant, as if looking into the past. And I suffered, he said, deeply, because I was always falling short, always failing to reach the place I thought I should be. And the harder I pushed, the further away peace seemed. Daiki listened, his chest aching with recognition. And then one day, the abbot said, an old teacher came to the monastery. He was very old, very simple. He did not speak much, but he watched me for several days, and then he called me aside and said, "You are trying to force the flower to bloom." The abbot looked at Daiki. I did not understand, and he said, "You cannot force awakening. You cannot demand it. You cannot earn it through suffering. You can only create the conditions for it. You plant the seed, you water it, you give it sunlight, and then you wait. You trust, you allow." Daiki felt tears prick at his eyes. "But I have been waiting. I have been trying." "Yes," the abbot said, "but you have been trying with violence, with harshness. You have been demanding that you be different than you are, and that is not the way." The abbot shifted slightly, his old knees creaking. The Buddha taught compassion for all beings, but most of us forget that we too are beings. We forget to extend compassion to ourselves. We judge ourselves, we criticize ourselves, we demand perfection, and in doing so, we create suffering. He leaned forward slightly. Daiki, you are 19 years old. You have been here less than a year. You are learning. You are growing. And that is exactly what you should be doing. You do not need to have all the answers now. You do not need to be enlightened now. You simply need to be here, present, patient, kind to yourself. Daiki's breath caught. But everyone else seems so calm, so certain. The abbot smiled gently. Everyone else is also struggling. They simply do not show it. Every monk in this hall has doubts. Every monk has days when their mind will not settle. Every monk wonders if they are doing it right. This is not a sign of failure. This is a sign of being human. He paused, then said, "The teaching is not to become something other than human. The teaching is to embrace your humanity with compassion, to meet your struggles with kindness, to say to yourself, 'Yes, this is hard. Yes, I am uncertain, and that is okay.'" Daiki sat very still, feeling the weight of the abbot's words sink into him. "This is metta," the abbot said, "loving kindness. It begins with yourself, with the willingness to see yourself clearly, all your flaws, all your doubts, all your struggles, and to meet them not with judgment, but with gentleness, to say, 'I am doing my best, and my best is enough.'" The abbot stood slowly. He walked to where Daiki sat and placed a hand on his shoulder, briefly. "You are enough, Daiki, right now. As you are, you do not need to be anything more. You simply need to be here and to be kind to the person you are." The abbot walked to the altar, bowed deeply, and then left the hall. Daiki sat alone in the dim light, the candle flickering on the altar, and he felt something break open inside him. Not a dramatic revelation, not a sudden enlightenment, just a softening, a release of the impossible standard he had been holding himself to. He thought, "I am enough, not perfect, not finished, not enlightened, but enough." He had been so harsh with himself, so demanding, expecting himself to transform overnight. But transformation did not work that way. It was slow. It was gradual. It required patience. And most of all, it required kindness. Daiki took a breath, slow and deep, and he felt the tightness in his chest ease. He thought of the teaching the abbot had shared, metta, loving kindness, beginning with himself. He closed his eyes and, for the first time, he tried it. He silently repeated the traditional phrases, directing them not outward but inward. "May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be at peace. May I live with ease." The words felt strange at first, awkward, as if he did not deserve them, but he continued, repeating them gently, over and over, like a lullaby sung to a frightened child. And slowly, gradually, he felt something shift, a warmth, a softness, a sense that perhaps he did not need to earn love. Perhaps it was already there, waiting for him to accept it. Daiki sat in the meditation hall as the night deepened around him. The candle burned low. The stars appeared in the window, and he sat with himself, not with judgment, but with kindness. The new year stretched ahead, and he would meet it not by demanding perfection, but by learning, slowly and patiently, to be gentle with himself, to trust that he was on the path, to know that he was enough. He stood slowly, bowed to the altar, and walked out into the night. The air was cold and clear. The stars were bright overhead, and Daiki walked across the courtyard, his steps light, his heart a little more open than it had been before. And so these 6 stories come to rest here at the beginning of a new year. 6 teachings from the Buddhist path, 6 ways of moving through the world with wisdom and grace. Impermanence, the truth that all things change, and that change is not failure but the nature of life. Right intention, the practice of beginning with a good heart and trusting that intention matters more than outcome. Non-attachment, the wisdom of working with care while holding results lightly without grasping. Mindfulness, the practice of returning again and again to this moment, this breath, with patience and kindness. The middle way, the balance between extremes, the path that honors both discipline and compassion. Loving kindness, the foundation of all practice, beginning with gentleness toward yourself. These are not lessons to be learned once and mastered. They are practices to return to again and again throughout the year and throughout your life. Some days you will remember them easily. Some days you will forget, and that is okay. The path is not about perfection. It is about presence, about showing up again and again with as much kindness and attention as you can manage in this moment. The new year is here. It is unmarked and open, and you walk into it not alone, but accompanied by these teachings, by this wisdom, by the knowledge that you are enough, exactly as you are. Rest now. Let these stories hold you as you drift toward sleep. Let them remind you that the path is gentle, that peace is possible, that you are held by something larger than yourself. Sleep well. The year is young, and you carry everything you need within you.